Hello everyone, today we're diving back into the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. And we're looking at a place that is quite literally bone-chilling. Today we're talking about Inwit, the veritable homeworld of the very emotive Primarch Rogal Dorn. Inwit is located in the Segmentum Tempestus, and if one had to describe it as anything, it would be harsh, or even unforgiving. Inwit is classified not as a death world, but as an ice world. But that classification doesn't do it justice. The planet orbits a singular dying star, which gives it a really bizarre dual zone atmosphere. On one side, you have these dry baked deserts under a sun that's basically on its last legs. And on the other side, you have shard storms so violent that they tear flesh right from your bone, and deep ice crevasses that never see the light of day. Despite it being a mostly lifeless, frigid rock with almost no resources, the people who live there are some of the toughest, hardiest, most vibrant humans in the galaxy. They live in these massive ice hives, subterranean cave-like structures, veritable underground honeycombed cities that spread throughout the entirety of the planet's crust, reaching up to 10 kilometers deep into the very earth and soil of the world. And their culture? Well, it's rather fascinating, as they have this complex ice caste system, and a nomadic lifestyle to boot, where clans move between hives to trade fuel, weapons, and technology. The culture itself, due to these environmental pressures, has become extremely collective. The needs of the group will often outweigh the needs of the individual, almost every single time. It's a society based almost entirely on endurance, and where their lore gets really cool for this ice world is when Inwit became the homeworld of Rogal Dorn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fists. Now, unlike his brothers who crashed into the planets and immediately became either slaves or gods amongst men, Dorn's story is a bit more grounded. He was found and raised by the Ice Tribe. Specifically, he had an adoptive grandfather who was a tribal chieftain who taught him the values of stoicism and duty. Dorn loved this man so much that even after he discovered that he was a demigod, he kept his grandfather's cloak, using it much like a blanket. But Dorn did not become a barbarian. By the time the Emperor found him in 835 M31, Dorn had just survived Inwit. He had conquered it. He had quickly become the Emperor and warlord of the entire Inwit cluster, as he built a small interstellar empire prior to the Emperor's arrival, which is no small feat, as the only Primarch to accomplish such a similar task was Reboot Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines. And when the Emperor finally rolled up to Inwit, Dorn did not meet him with a spear or a sword, but rather a starship known as the Phalanx. This highly advanced piece of technology was about the size of a small moon, and to this day, we aren't 100% sure if Dorn built it himself, using Inwit's surprisingly advanced shipyards, which were eons ahead of almost any other in the galaxy, or if he found it and fixed it up. Either way, when the Emperor came, this was Dorn's ultimate flex. Even now, in the modern era, Inwit remains one of the primary recruiting worlds for the Imperial Fists. If you want to be a Space Marine of Dorn's lineage, you're probably coming from there, Necromunda, or Terra itself. Legendary warriors such as Alexis Pollux, Fafnir Ran, and Archimedes all come from the ice tribes of Inwit. Even the current Master of the Administratum, Violetta Roshikover, hails from the frozen wasteland. This is not something to be made light of, since the job of Master of the Administratum almost always goes to someone born on Terra, and this individual was selected specifically because they came from Inwit, as it is a world that proves that you don't need a lush paradise to build an empire, as it instills enough grit for any of its residents to survive the coming storm. Now that we know a bit more about Inwit's history, we can focus in on the geography, because the more you read about the planet, the more it sounds less like a civilization and more like a survival horror game that never ends. Tests describe Inwit's star as old and withered, literally bleeding off its heat as this cold red light. It's not just a regular cold, but rather the cold of death. And because physics seems to hate this planet, it's tidally locked. If you don't know, tidally locked means that the planet's always with one direction facing one way and with the other facing the other way. Usually one side of the planet will face towards the star and the other towards space. And normally this would create a twilight zone, a habitable belt, right where the two sides meet. But on Inwit, that's not the case. There's a definite dark side, which is called the Splintered Land. And it's in perpetual night. We're talking about dozens of frozen mountain ranges, plains of frost dunes, and the Crevasse Mountains. This is a wilderness stalked by beasts that have evolved specifically to hunt humans on the dark side. And it has shaped both the people's bodies and their beliefs. Those who live there aren't just citizens of the Imperium. They are living prey that have learned to fight back. In contrast to this, there's also the light side. And if you thought that the sunny side would have awesome vacation spots, well, you'd be wrong, as light side is just drift-crusted saline seas and baking rock under an unblinking gaze from a dying star. It offers little more comfort than the dark side, and there is no happy, habitable twilight zone. But it gets worse. The lore mentions that under the ice crust, there are subterranean seas. These aren't just normal oceans. They are described as thick seas, as in flowing with sluggish tides. Swimming in that sludge are pale, sightless creatures. These things have evolved past the need for eyes, and they hunt through vibration, having a perpetual taste for blood. So while Inuit's people are navigating the surface storms, they are walking on top of an ocean that is filled with blind monsters, waiting for a crack in the ice sheets so they may be free again. Now, what makes Inwit interesting as a world is that it's not just a death world, but rather an ice world in particular. If you're standing on the surface, shivering on your furs, while fighting off the giant vibration-hunting ice worms, and you look up into the sky, you wouldn't just see the stars, you'd see the citadels of the void, great ancient space stations, and orbital shipyards, which float above the planet, shrouded in perpetual auras. And they don't just create a lost past, they also shield the world from solar radiation to a great extent. These stations have been watching over Inwit since before records began, which strangely enough is believed to be how the phalanx came to be, or at least where it was found. Texts explicitly say that those from Inwit are barbaric, but they are also far from unsophisticated. This has led the world to develop into what looks like a primitive societal structure to survive the cold, but they possess technological skills and knowledge enough to maintain the orbital shipyards, which rival even Mars's production capabilities. However, outside of these shipyards and the bare mineral of the Earth, the planet has nothing. No gold, no major crops, no oil. Its seas are buried, and its mountains are empty of anything that could be valuable. But because the world is so hostile, it's actually produced the one resource that truly matters to the Imperium: people of a certain breed. The warriors of Inwit are raised under a simple philosophy. The price of weakness is death, not just for you, but for your kin. This mindset is why, during the Age of Strife, when the rest of humanity collapsed into madness and demonic possession, Inwit didn't just survive, they conquered. They built an island empire of order in a galaxy filled to the brim with chaos. Essentially, they survived the blind blood monsters and the freezing dark, so warp storms, while being nothing to scoff at, were hardly a challenge. And that is the stock from which the Imperial Fists are bred from. We've talked about the geography, we've talked about the monsters, but now we have to focus in more closely to the society, which is where Inwit goes from just being a worldwide survival game to the blueprint for the Imperial Fists' glory. Source material puts it rather bluntly. Death comes in many forms on Inwit. It is not just ice storms that can freeze you solid in seconds. It's not just predators that roam in the dark. It's the little things. A world where a lapse in concentration, such as forgetting to double check the warmth seal that holds your house together, slipping even by the smallest fraction, not only leading to the cold getting you, but getting your entire family killed. Because of this constant threat, the people of Inwit are described as grim and dedicated to the survival of the whole rather than the individual. An extreme utilitarian mindset that is mirrored in Rogal Dorn. Despite their knowledge and technology, most of the population is nomadic as they move between these massive subterranean ice hives, trading weapons, fuel, technology. And naturally, because resources are scarce, clan warfare is just a mundanity that they have to deal with. Young warriors learn to defend against rival clans. At the same time, they learned not to freeze to death. But unlike the wolves of Fenris, these aren't just brutes hitting each other with clubs. Texts say they have an innate sense of an object's functional value. They respect knowledge. In fact, their entire philosophy of conquest is, you have knowledge I don't. I'm going to conquer you, and I'm going to learn everything you know. And they use that knowledge to advance not only their society, but their tribe's technology as a whole. Long ago, during Old Night, when Terra was basically a radioactive wasteland ruled by techno-barbarians, and everyone else was getting eaten by warp storms and abominations from space hell, Inwit was basically building its own miniature stellar empire. The people of Inwit were out there conquering the stars, and their strategy was terrifyingly efficient, one which much of the Imperium would adapt. On every world they took over, they did three things: assimilate, realign, and reinforce. However, in contrast to most civilizations' practices of empire building, their capital world would not become a paradise. They believed that Inwit's rulers would become soft, weak, and pliable. So even as Inwit became the center of a massive star system spanning empire, the planet itself would remain unchanged. The ice hives stayed, the clan feuds would remain. The warriors and monarchs who commanded armies across the stars would live in this freezing hell, huddled within caves, living lives little easier than that of their vassals. They believed that this harshness was what gave them their strength, so they refused to fix it. They ringed their planet with weapon stations, but they kept their beds made of ice. And it was into a planet who had gone through all this, within this brutal expanding empire that Rogal Dorn grew up. We don't know much about his earliest years, as the lore loves to keep this Primarch's childhood incredibly vague. But we know that he was adopted into House Dorn, also known as the Ice Caste of Dorn. We know he wasn't just a soldier, as he grew to rule the entirety of the Inwit cluster. And we know that it was his grandfather who not only shaped the Primarch, but who found him and brought him to the clan. He didn't just teach Dorn how to swing a weapon, he taught him tactics, strategies, and diplomacy. So by the time that the Emperor had actually showed up, Dorn wasn't a feral wild child who had just recently started planetary expansion like the Lion, or a warring barbarian brute struggling on a losing venture to gain freedom for his slave army. He had already become an emperor in his own right. He was a statesman who grew up in the dark, ruling a spacefaring empire from a cave with a box of scraps. And honestly, the Imperial Fists couldn't have gotten a more fitting leader. So when the end of the Inwit era comes, the story becomes surprisingly more human. For a setting that's usually filled with chainswords, alien gods, the way that Rogal Dorn's story on Inwit concludes is kind of tastefully beautiful. Even after Dorn discovered he wasn't actually blood related to his grandfather, having realized he was a genetically engineered demigod created in a lab under the Himalayan mountains in a planet so far away that its central star was not even visible from Inwit, he didn't care. He held the man's memory in such high regard, and his opinions were of such high value to Dorn that he kept the fur-edged robe that belonged to his grandfather, and he would sleep with it on his bed every single night. This was a man known as the Praetorian of Terra, the brick wall of the Imperium, and he's carrying around a piece of his home like a literal security blanket. This shows you that Inwit did not just give him a tactical mind or the endurance to hold out against the forces of chaos. It gave him his heart. Dorn's qualities and the cultures of Inwit married perfectly, to the point that he took that empire of order and he dialed it up to 11. He ordered their armies, refined their training, and began fashioning spacecraft, the likes of which the galaxy hadn't seen since the golden age of technology. So when the Emperor was finally here to pick up Dorn in the Inwit system in 835 M31, he didn't find a lost, confused boy. He didn't find a wrathful, freed slave. He found a man sitting on the throne of a star-spanning society who had already been forged into the perfect tool for war, whose empire did not need rescuing, but rather calm integration and a seamless merger. And this brings us to the Phalanx. This is the Imperial Fists mobile fortress monastery. It is quite literally a moon-sized starship. Some records say Dorn found it within the orbiting rings on Inwit. Others say he built it using the ancient shipyards of Inwit. But regardless of where it came from, when the Emperor arrived, Dorn didn't just kneel. He handed over the keys to the most powerful spaceship in the galaxy as a gift. It was his way of saying, "Thank you for welcoming to the family, Dad. Here's a fortress." Because of the Phalanx, the Imperial Fists are a bit of an anomaly. Their homeworld is Inwit and Terra. They're the only chapter that actually gets to claim the throne world as their own. But in functional terms, they are essentially a fleet-based chapter with a handful of recruiting worlds, as they have spent their entire history as a legion, primarily on this massive ship, carrying the very spirit of Inwit, that cold, nomadic resilience across the stars.